Okay, let's talk white, which is famously one of the most difficult colors within watercolor. You know the theory. The idea is that what you want to do is preserve the white color of the paper, and it's the white color of the paper which does the work of white. That is the theory. Your temptation will be that in almost any box of paints that you open, there will be a block of white paint. There'll also be a block of black paint. We'll do a different video on black too. There will be a block of white paint. I tell you honestly, I have never ever in my life opened the white paint in a box of watercolors. Why? Because of the temptation. Because I don't know what it does, I don't know how it messes, I don't know how it behaves, but I'm pretty sure it will make the paint opaque. And if I want to make a color pale, you know the theory, if you want to make a color pale, you add water to it. It's the water that makes the thing pale and keeps it transparent. Whereas if you add white to it, it will make it solid. So how do you preserve the white of the paper? Well, one simple way, the most obvious way, obviously, is by controlling the paint. And if you get a nice brush full of color, you can, by your control, know what you're doing. If you fancy showing off a little bit more, make sure you've got a brush of clean water. You do the shape in clean water that you want to do, and you can use a really fine brush or something. If you want it to be fine, you can do whatever you like, but when you then add the color will then flow into the shape. And that's even nicer when you want to bring a different color into the mix alongside it. So if you want to mix your colors on the page, but still stay within the shape that you've predetermined, making the paper wet beforehand will guarantee that you control it. Now, that's the pure way of doing it. And here we go. I can move the paint around within the boundaries set by that water, and it will kind of behave nicely and kind of misbehave, and I'm fine with that. Sometimes though, you want to preserve something, maybe a sparkle from a fountain, a flash of sunlight, something like that. What do? Well, here's the most common way of doing it, because a little flash of water is really hard to predict, really hard to control, and certainly with a decent sized brush, really hard to get right. So here's one way of doing it, which is a candle. This is called water resist. It's wax. Here's just an ordinary old household candle, and it is in the way of things. If I doodle down with some wax on the paper, that wax will resist the water, and you can get a really nice gentle flow of that, and it will keep on working. So again, if you add in a little bit of blue or something alongside it to make some nice mixes on the page, it's going to stay there, it's going to behave. If you want something a little bit more precise, then the standard way of doing it is with something like this, which is called masking fluid. It's like a very weak rubber solution. If you remember rubber solution glue, it's like that. You lay it down and you preserve it. If you need to do something precise, then do it. I haven't used this for years. In fact, I've tried to get the lid off just now and I couldn't do it. It's so long since I've used the masking fluid. My problem was that I was trying to move in a livelier direction with the colors, and this started to be a little bit too neat, a little bit too precise in what I was doing. It also, unless you're careful, wrecks your brush. So use an old brush or a stick or something like that, which will get you through it. A cocktail stick, something small, neat and line. But don't put your decent watercolor brushes inside the masking fluid. The other tip that I learned when I was using it is you really must make sure that the whole process is dry. You get to take it off. You can use an eraser or your finger, doesn't really matter. But if there is the slightest hint of water still in your paint when you try to remove the rubber solution, it will smudge, and the whole point of what you tried to do will be lost. So if you're a purist, you want to keep the white of the paper and you don't trust your brush technique to be able to do it, this is a good solid way of doing it. A couple of other solutions. I've said I don't use watercolor paint from the boxes. I'm never quite sure what it's going to do. This, however, is gouache. Now, gouache is a range of paints that are like watercolors, but they're opaque. They're really solid, and I have now changed to always making sure that I've got one of these in white in my kit, or I transfer one into a little pan so I've got something with me, because I don't mix it with any paints, because that ruins the paints. It makes them opaque, which is not what you want to do. But straight out the tube on your hand, you don't need a huge amount of it, but you can then dot in the stuff you want to dot and just get the white that you need. More than that, if you're saying I actually quite like something which is a bit more dry, brushy, you can get some more technique in there, and it can look a little bit flowing. Now, what you need to know is this is the effect that you're after. And if the effect you're after is showing that you have added white watercolor paint or some other gouache, go for it. Use it. You are not breaking one of the watercolor 10 commandments by using gouache, so long as you know that's what you're doing and why. Arguably one of the top 2 watercolor painters ever, John Singer Sargent, the other one being Turner, obviously. John Singer Sargent used this all the time. He used it with white, he used it with other colors, and he would be able to go in then on his really dark stuff and get some really intense colors. And getting light on dark is normally impossible with watercolor unless you use something opaque. So you can use that, and because it's a watercolor, it just washes off. It does, though, make the water that you're using contain it. And I have found that it transfers much more easily to other brushes. It doesn't work like clean water once it's got gouache in it, so just keep it a little bit separate. And the other way is to use a white pencil. This is just an ordinary white pencil, and you can go back into it. You're starting to use mixed medium, that's fine, but just know what you're doing and use it, and don't be embarrassed about doing it. What you can't do is use this stuff to cover over your mistakes. So use the white of the paper, use your brush, use the water itself and let it flow into the shape, use some kind of water resist, use the masking fluid, use gouache, use a pencil, use a watercolor pencil. There's all sorts of ways of doing white. Just make sure that you've decided what you're going to do, and you don't use the watercolor from the box because it's full of chalk.